Okay, hello again. That last video was, I was too tired. It was too late. It's still too late. But uh, in the process of watching that one, it's clear to me that I need to follow it up pretty much right away. I'll have something much clearer in terms of links and probably a PDF that you can look at on screen or print out uh, with a much better explanation of the humors and how to use them as a part of uh, as a tool to help you understand yourself better and to capitalize on your strengths and to compensate for or correct your weaknesses. Uh, and yes, I'm I'm definitely working on the resource page. It will soon start appearing as a link below. It is still late, but I think I'm on top of it enough to do another one right away. And one of the reasons I want to do that is because I'm still thinking about that stuff that I wrote down this afternoon when I sort of got a flood of insight and information as to what I'm going to do with this series. And one more thing on your on the getting to know yourself stuff. I mean, probably we could talk about that forever, but that's probably not the most efficient use of our time. I know that at some point, some of you are going to want to ask me questions about the things that I've been covering, and you'll certainly want to see some of the resources. And sure, I'm up for that. But right now, I want to lay the foundation. I'm in some videos I do a better job of that than others. But the thing is to lay a foundation so that we have some so that first of all you have some tools to work with in terms of self-understanding, in terms of formulating visions, and in terms of the tools that you need to make those visions real. One of the things that we talked about when I was covering the stars was I mentioned Carlos Castaneda and the idea of power spots and things of that nature. Carlos is an interesting fellow, but one of the things that I think is important to mention about him and his work is that I have noticed that among many of the millennials, shamanism has become quite popular. Essentially, what Carlos is doing and writing about is shamanism. There's a tradition in Latin America that has to do with basically the witch doctor or the local witch or the local magician or whatever, and they call them brujos, or feminine I think is bruja. And it's not uncommon in Latin America for a person to if they feel that their problem is metaphysical rather than material, it's not uncommon for them to go and buy a charm or a potion or get a talisman or something like that from the local brujo. Yes. Those of you who are more familiar with Latin American culture, with Latin culture, will may want to correct me on some of this because I'm not exactly steeped in it, but I've been somewhat exposed. And then there's there are the books by Castaneda. One of the things that strikes me is that much of the of what I see and hear about shamanism these days is kind of ungrounded. Castaneda paints a much fuller picture. And although he's not big on being very explicit about the foundations of what he's doing, he basically approaches it from the point of view of it being grounded in a tradition, and it being a living tradition with practitioners, and that if you want to learn how to do it, how to be a brujo, basically, although it's more learning a craft, which is what the Wiccans call what they do too, is learning a craft. But anyway, the idea is you immerse yourself in the tradition. You follow the practices. Carlos went to the mountains of Mexico, which is not a good idea these days. The drug wars weren't anywhere near as intense then as they are now, or at least not apparently. Considering the people he hung out with and what he was doing, he may have been fine even under modern conditions, but it's not something I would recommend. He spent time with this practitioner whose name was Don Juan in the mountains of Mexico, and they went out on I guess field trips, you might call it, to do ritual processes to gather herbs and make potions and do various other kinds of practices. But part of this was to become sort of in tune with, or in touch with, or connected with the plants. In that culture, every plant has a very strong spirit. Those of you who have heard stories about, or who were around during the 1960s are perhaps familiar with the idea of San Mescalito, who is supposed to be the spirit of the peyote cactus, mescaline. Some of you may or may not be familiar with the idea of spending some time in a sweat lodge. Some of you may or may not be familiar with the concept of the dark night of the soul, where you deal with all your inner stuff, your inner demons, your inner programming sometimes, but usually it's a little more active and dramatic than that. I had my periods of things like that, and I've known quite a number of people who've had those kinds of experiences. And that's another way to get to know yourself very well, and to get to know what is your bedrock. You know, what are you made of? What is your core? Wandering around. I mean, you don't have to wander around the mountains of Mexico, okay? There are plenty of other places where if you want to wander around out there in the wild, you can do it. It's better if you have a guide. It's better if you have some instruction from a practitioner. Theoretically, I suppose you could do it on your own if you get a good connection with the spirits and they decide that they want to help you out. Of course, if you offend them, they might, sort of direct you into a disaster. But, you got to have confidence. You got to have faith. You got to do it if that's your path. Personally, I'm not into shamanism. I view it as something that's it's a very personal way of knowing, and it's in the end mostly what you end up with is something that's fine-tuned to you, but it does help you integrate into the world, especially the natural world, and it does put you more in touch with the invisible world. Now, there's another process. I mean, I'll be honest. I mean, during the 60s, yes, I experimented with drugs a little bit, but that's long ago and far away at this point. I don't regret it. On the other hand, I never became addicted, except to cigarettes, of course. And I saw, I experienced and observed uh, a lot of different pros and cons, but primarily my experiences were good. Uh, I do not recommend a druggy path. I don't. At the same time, I don't see anything wrong with judicious and ritual use of uh, certain drugs as they're involved in a shamanistic or other ritual process. For example, there are people who go down to Brazil to partake of an herb called ayahuasca, which is something which, from the reports I've heard, is something like DMT, which was popular in the 60s. They called it the businessman's high because it hits very fast. You have the experience for maybe 30 minutes, and hey, lunch, your lunch break is over, you go back to work. It used to be called the businessman's high. The way they do the ayahuasca, though, in Brazil, they drink it in teas, and they keep the dosage level steady. So it lasts somewhat longer than half an hour, and of course they're talking to you or chanting or whatever I don't know the process. I haven't been there. I've heard about it, and I've talked to people who've experienced it, but no, I haven't been there. I don't have a great desire to go and do ayahuasca in Brazil. I partly, there are other things that are higher priorities for me as far as what I would like to do with my time, and that includes spiritual things, and that includes, just flat how I want to spend my time. Now, for people who are into that sort of thing, no problem. You will probably get a lot out of it. It'll be one of those experiences of a lifetime. However, if you you should also be careful in Brazil. The political and social climate in Brazil is a little chaotic at times. It's, from what I've heard, it's not quite as bad as Mexico, but I don't, I don't have a big desire to go to either place. If I were to go, I would strongly consider things like, concealed carry permits and someone that I could call to to back me up. I might want to take a bodyguard, whatever. But really, I don't have a great need to go. I don't have a great desire to go. So Brazil and Mexico are not on my list of places to go right now. However, there are many accounts of shamanistic experiences, and the shamanistic experience can be more just a more ritual approach to life, and to those activities you're going to perform, so that they become more structured and more likely to connect you on a deeper level with things. So that's another approach that I felt I should say something about, and I will put Castaneda's books in the link. And if I find something else, particularly interesting or revealing about using the approach of shamanism to for self-knowledge and to help use to help you ritually structure some aspects of your life and practices, I will be sure to include those. I'm not going to make a great search because although I think hey, it's cool and it's a valid approach, but it's not my approach. So I'm not going to put a great deal of effort into it. I will include Castaneda, and as things catch my eye, I will include those in my resource list too. That was one last point that I felt was important to cover. I talked about stars. I talked a little bit about the self-help stuff, and humoral nature, and now I'm giving you a little bit more about Castaneda and the shamanistic approach. These are some of the some of the main ways that I can think of that occur to me that I have some familiarity with as far as how to get to know yourself. There's one last thing that we need to go over as far as talking about the basic resource of yourself, and that's talk a little bit about some more conventional approaches, you might say. There's therapy, which it's so hard to find it, find one that's really good and really works for you. And it's expensive, but it's a path some people take. Depth psychology, things like that. And then of course there's there is simply using the vast and abundantly available array of self-help, self-development texts that are out there. And there are coaches available these days. Again, you've got to be discerning about the quality, but there are coaches. You find one that you resonate with, that you connect with, and is good quality. Sure, that could work too. Anyway, to wrap up our discussions about approaches, ways to get to know yourself, and to a certain extent, why you want to do it. We'll probably wrap that up in the next video, and then we'll move on to how you formulate a vision. And why you want to formulate a vision. Partly that should be obvious once you know yourself, but not necessarily. Okay, thank you for watching.